Yeah, I want to ask you specifically in your response to this hypothetical. I can very easily map a world in the reasonably near future where the most powerful models are gated on one of or maybe both two things. So the first one being price. Like I could very much see a world in which the next generation of models, or maybe two or three generations later, simply aren't economically feasible for the vast majority of people, right? How many folks can actually spend $200 per month is very low. The folks that can spend 2,000 or $20,000 per month is even lower, right? And in orders of magnitude lower, right? The amount of Americans that can spend 20 grand per month on a model is basically zero, right? It's far less than 1%. So I can see very quickly the average person, the average professional getting price gated out of frontier intelligence. I think it's a bad thing for the record, but I can see that happening over time. The second thing is back to your earlier question on who regulates this, either the companies themselves or the government. In either one of those worlds, you're going to have select people, depending on who they are or what they're working on, gated out of that regulatory approval aspect. So in the same way that you have folks that, can't fly on certain airlines or can't, buy certain uh, materials, chemicals, because of their history or because of their criminal record or something like that. You're going to similarly have folks who can and cannot access frontier intelligence capabilities based on some moving target of kind of third party regulated criteria. And that to me is dystopian. I think overall, like I don't exactly know how to feel about that, but both, either one or both of those realities do feel inevitable
I
to me.
agree. I think there's this dystopian and abundant future, and I'm like you, struggling to reconcile these two realities because I hold them both to be true. There is going to be this incredible abundance ahead of us, and there's also this incredible divergence of outcomes between the people who have enough capital to afford the frontier model, the SOTA model, and the people who don't. I think there may be a scenario where the best scenario I can envision is that if the non-SOTA models, the models that are a generation behind, or the open source movement is, let's call it 3 to 6 months behind, but it's essentially free, then what we have is a dynamic where the SOTA model labs, Anthropic, OpenAI, have to come out with breakthroughs every 3 to 6 months in order to get that revenue that is so juicy at the very, very front edge. But they get essentially no revenue for the models that are a year old, and trailing off pretty precipitously between 3 months and on, because the open source models will distill, they will do their best to replicate the innovations, whether through distillation or just technique. And if, for example, if Jensen can build that, if Jensen can build the 6 months behind model, and everybody agrees this is fair game, right? I think the only reason Jensen hasn't done it is because he would be essentially fighting his competitors. But now what's happened is his competitors are building ASICs. They're building alternative silicon, and so his competitors, his best customers are now becoming his competitors in a way that frees his hand to go build a open source model that is by definition 6 months behind, maybe 12 months behind. What that can do is make AI essentially abundant and free, virtually free, on the margins free to most people, while the people who are willing to pay 2,000 a month, 20,000 a month, 200,000 a month, those people can have the very, very best cutting edge model that will give them an advantage, but it will be a short-lived one. So they will have to continually win as well, in order to justify that expense.
Yeah, I think a large part of that's right. The lens that I'm looking at that through, and the analogy I guess probe with you in response to that, is education. Like if you think just like standards like secondary education, post grad, think about like university undergrads and on. What we've seen is incredible pricing power from a select few universities, right? The Ivies of the world, the post Ivies, that kind of thing, in which the value that's accrued isn't the actual thing itself, it's being able to host it. And like a world that I can see, I think everything you just said can be true, but the result of all of that is that the few that can afford the frontier intelligence reaps most, if not all, of the actual economic value of it, because all the most talented people in the world go there because that company is going to be buying them frontier intelligence, right? And you're going to get this extreme polarization of everybody that can get into the frontier access club, let's just call it that, gets in, while the long tail and the median is left kind of out. And again, the analogy I would use is education, and like education is effectively free on YouTube, right? But no one pays to go to Harvard to get the YouTube style education. They pay to go to Harvard for the social access, the networking, right? Access to truly elite technical mentorship in the labs and that kind of thing. And I do wonder if we're headed for an artificial world in which that same stratification happens. I'm curious how you respond to that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good analogy that if education is a analogy for where large language models go, then my experience, my anecdotal experience, is that you can get just as good of an undergraduate education at basically any large state school as you can the very best elite schools. You don't get the piece of paper. You don't have that small network of close relationships. You're absolutely right about that. But you do get fundamentally the same underlying training, perhaps even better training, because it's more focused, and the grad students aren't eager to get their way up the ladder as much as they are eager to teach. And so if that's the model, then I would say to just push a little bit on that idea that the economic benefits accrue only to the people using SOTA. I would say that orchestration is showing us a couple of important lessons. One is that it's not economically smart to throw everything at the very best model. Number two, even the people who can afford the very best models don't often know how to use them well. So the prompter matters, and what you ask actually makes a big difference. So you could imagine someone with 1% of the budget of a second person, but the second person just isn't a great prompter, and the first person is a great prompter, and that human dynamic can level that playing field. And again, if you only have a short window where you have this benefit, this advantage, and you aren't very efficient with your dollars, and you aren't a great user, then your lack of skill can end up playing an important difference.
Yeah, I do believe all that. I think the thing that it's difficult to get out of my mind is, do these systems become actually recursive or not? Because the 3 to 6 month lead holds so long as humans are the ones continuing to push that frontier. If these systems do arrive at some level of self-recursion, then there's a reality that exists in which that lead is compounding, meaning 3 months becomes 3 years, becomes 30 years, becomes 300 years on various cycles. It doesn't even expand linearly, but it expands exponentially. I'm fairly certain we will reach recursive software improvement. I think the thing that's unknown to me is whether or not recursive software improvement extrapolates to recursive improvement elsewhere. Is software all you need to really conquer white collar knowledge work tasks that are, stationary on a keyboard? Does that parlay into the physical world where it becomes a robotics advantage, et cetera? That to me feels like the unknown. And in a world in which that recursive self-improvement, either one, isn't reached, or two, doesn't extrapolate beyond verticals, right? Meaning like recursive software doesn't translate to recursive, PowerPoint building or whatever, analytics research, et cetera, financial research, et cetera, doesn't extrapolate to physical robotics. I think you're right. I think there's a world in which open source can catch up, other people can compete. In the alternative universe, where recursive software improvement does lead to extrapolated recursive improvement in those other domains, it feels reasonable to visualize a single winner there. And a winner again, with compounding advantage staying out in front. Again, that the latter where you kind of get a single winner feels less likely to me, but I actually think the reality is somewhere in the middle where you get an oligarchic winner take all, meaning you get 2 to 3 to maybe 4 to 5 winners that really survive this. And then you've got